Okay, in this lesson for our Koine Project class, I would like to discuss the unfair advantage of being in a learning organization. For example, the seminary that I attended was a learning organization. They did not discourage learning. Dr. David Robinson, for example, told us to question anything in the Bible, to evaluate everything, read it, review it. He said to look at everything. Well, what I want to address today is there's something called the Einstellung effect. Now, that's a long or lengthy way of saying that, for example, as we were taught in, let's say, consulting, that if you're a hammer, everything you see looks like a nail, which means the way you solve a problem might be the only way you approach any problem. So, first of all, the young and old earth problem, first of all, it's not really a problem. Now, there are those who'll make it a problem for someone else. Now, that would be outside of a learning organizational environment, for example. It certainly wouldn't be characteristic of an ecclesia, a living, learning organism, a body of people. And then, of course, in a learning organization like the seminary, a professor believed in the gap fact, and then others did not quite share that strong of a support for it. And yet others were there teaching. So if you were learning from a Greek professor, Hebrew professor, hermeneutics, apologetics, you're learning survey, theology. So all the subjects are being taught, and each of the professors enjoyed the academic freedom of teaching and positing out accordingly. Now, I don't think you'll find people that pigeonhole themselves very often, but how would we go about, because the largest problem about this Einstellung effect is, how do you even know what to do next if you only know one way to solve a problem? So let's look at young versus old earth, and then look at why it shouldn't be a problem for anyone. That is, as I've had people come into the ecclesia, not knowing it was an ecclesia, that we were called out. We were people who believed the gospel, believed Jesus Christ for everlasting life. We had been baptized, covenanted together now, and there we were, steadfastly continuing in the apostles' doctrine, and then had a fellowship into the gospel, and then we would self-examine, self-correct, properly present ourselves to the Lord's table, and grow in grace and knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We would engage in disciple making, and fathers would have their hearts turned toward their children. Men would be husbands to their wives. Parents would raise their children, nurture the admonition of the Lord. So you get the picture. Where would someone find the accommodation for an ill disposition to say, well, it's your problem, this young versus old, or this whatever? So let's notice that there's really no, first thing is, don't accept a problem. Don't accept something as your problem. You didn't start that. For example, we'll go back to my Schofield Bible. King James Version has 4004 BC in the center column of the Bible. Now, that was by a person named Usher, if I spell his name correctly. And what you can learn then is that he also believed in the exact day, October 23rd, 4004. Now, I don't know. I've never investigated how he calculated that, and that's fine. I don't need to. But then he also believed October 23rd, 1996 would be the end of the world to the day. That was fascinating. Now, that's whose problem? It's no one's problem, and Usher's not here. So then the second thing we can do when we begin evaluating, it's what we're free to do in a learning environment where we're encouraged to learn. We're free to learn. We're not penalized by those who would presume that controversies between others are now obliged upon us to bring them together and make them collaborate, you might say. Well, in Genesis 1, 2, for example, you have the term was, and that's in standard font. And in the same verse you have was, I don't know, it's in italics, so it's in italics. Now, so that will give you, it'll prompt you to ask, why is that? Well, this term is from ha-ya, and it's in Hebrew, it's H1961. That's the term. And this is supplied. The italics were written in by the translators, and it is a form of be, which a be verb doesn't exist in Hebrew. So it was supplied. Well, then you remember we just go on. So let's go to number 3. You remember we're allowing the information to be evaluated. We're not simply preferring young versus old. We know young's not even a category. It's a formed category. The Bible already has a description, old, of the earth, so we can just take that out. So here in Koine Greek, for example, there's ginomai, which would be, in Hebrew, it would correspond to this term, and it means come to be. And then there's Amy, as in the famous expression ego Amy, and this is a form of be. So you have, first example, ego Amy, I myself am. So this is am, first person. So we have a be verb in Koine Greek, and we have a come to be. So then you can go and find text where ha-ya is translated ginomai in the Koine text. You can go to the Septuagint and see where that is. Now that's just initial information. So you ask, well, if I'm always solving the problem the same way, or I am finding myself where I'm primed according to, let's say, young earth or old earth. Well, remember, let's say, for example, before I ever attended seminary, before I ever attended junior high school, still in elementary school, we had our Bible. We didn't call it the King James because there wasn't anything else out there. I don't remember King James. I think the first time I encountered King James only was 1980, and then other translations were out and beginning to have dictionaries and things that could be used with that, or I became aware of it. And so when people started saying King James only, that was new in the sense of, well, we always brought the Bible to church. No one had anything else. So we had our Bible, English Bible, and it was a King James after most of us used it for years. I remember when I heard about it, I thought King James may have wrote the Bible. Of course, that's not it. So security of the believer, once saved, always saved, obviously. Local church, an ecclesia, a body of baptized believers covenanted together. We were dragged to an ecclesia. Sometimes we didn't want to go, but that was really we were never given that option. Even on Sunday, then businesses were closed. So, and then, of course, we would learn about Genesis, the 6-day creation. So I'm not sure, and we all knew about the rapture. Now, it had not occurred to me pre-trib meant that we would be so far into the future. I thought pre meant, I heard that later, but now I've learned that we might be right at the threshold of the 7-year tribulation, and I was supposed to be gone 40 years ago, and that's another story, the way it was taught. It was good, and it's still true that the return of Christ is not contingent upon the infallibility of my conjecture, which is a contradiction. So when people began to speak about 6-day literal creation, to me, it would be as silly as saying, once saved, always saved. It'd be as silly as saying, use your King James Bible. Well, we're already doing that. That was all before the seminary. So when people say, well, now they're teach this, or somebody teaches that, or someone's gone from pre-trib to post-trib, that's really not a problem as far as what would we be stressing about. It would just be an opportunity for us in this Koine Project Class to let's evaluate, let's not negate. I certainly don't find it anywhere to advocate something that I can't demonstrate that's written. But back to how do we approach this? Well, first, let's know it's not a problem for someone else. So to put this on another brother would not be anything Jesus taught. He said to do unto others as we'd have them do unto us. So I learned years before the seminary that there's very few people out there wanting to engage in collaborative learning or collaborative reasoning, collective learning. So now that we have this, we can move on and notice in Genesis 1, for example, we have Bereshith. Bereshith, those of you that using your Hebrew now, that's good. Bereshith. So in beginning, so we have in beginning. This, you notice that in your English as well. And then we have bara. Bara, and you notice that's the same three letters, first three letters in beginning. Bara, and then we have he created. And then in Genesis 2:4, however, we have something somewhat different. We have Asa. All right, it's Sa. Asa, okay. No, that's not correct. Asa. And then we have, this is he made. He made. And then we have Biyom. Biyom. In day. It's also the same word. Yom is where we get the word time. We even say day, time, nighttime. Isn't that interesting? So we have in time made, and we have in beginning created. So we can notice that. Let me check that. See if I can look that up real quick without interrupting our lesson. But these little gadgets, you can check your workout really quick. Make sure that's awesome. I can't believe I haven't done that in so long. Yeah, that's correct. We're good. Yeah, I just knew it. I just something. Well, anyway, I trust not to be misled when I'm working. So now we have in beginning here, and then we also now we can notice number 5 in Isaiah 48:3. He created instantly. So that's in the Bible. It's not a threat to us. Remember, we're in a learning organization. We're in an ecclesia. It's our Bible. Isaiah 48:3 is our text. Genesis 2:4 is our text. Genesis 1:1 is our text. I believe the entire Bible before I ever studied the Bible. So I certainly don't, by studying it now, find an aversion to it. And then we remember, if we notice that in a lower expression of arithmetic, let's say, that any number, real number divided by infinity, for example, divided by infinity equals 0. So one event, create, divided by the infinite power of God would require 0 time. And of course, he's immutable, no loss of energy. And of course, we also know, which I found an atheist, an advocate of atheism. I think his name's AlexO'Connor. He used to have a YouTube channel, or may still, called The Cosmic Skeptic. And he did he did something he really wasn't aware of subconsciously, I'm sure. But he showed a strong aversion to someone had taught that the Bible teaches the world or the earth is spherical. And they were using a text that said, talking about the earth, the circle of the earth. And he was challenging even that. He really went out of his way to stamp down anything that might be in the Bible that would correspond to something that science might teach. Well, that really indicated some let's say his internal scaffolding was shaking at just the thought that, well, the earth is a circle or the circle of the earth, and maybe the earth the Bible doesn't teach, because he was saying it taught a flat earth, a fixed, immovable earth, no rotating on axis, no revolving around the sun, and whatever else. So he needed everything in the Bible to not match anything in science, which is fine. It's just that I found that fascinating because I even made a video where I asked if he would do an evaluation of 1 day to the 1,000 years, and then the multiplicative inverse, if you will, the 1,000 years to 1 day ratio, which, remember, that's in our Bible as well. And then in Psalm 90, we noticed that 90% of the lifespan of 1,000 years was removed from 100% of humanity. We were taught in that psalm the alarming reality that we should number our days, and yet I still am trying to remember the birthdays of my children, grandchildren, keep up with that so that each year we have that birthday. And yet the urgency of life, according to that psalm, is each day. So here was this, and of course we did that, and I'll stop here, but you can see where it's really not anything for there to be a problem for any other person, because the Koine Greek having a be verb and a come to be verb, and then Hebrew having a come to be, but then not a be, and you'd want to find out what was the rationale with the translators, which that's difficult to find that. You won't find most people interested in their English Bible. They moved on to other English Bibles and never addressed this. You won't find people who've evaluated why did Usher say the world ended in 1996, but just as a side note, you remember we noticed that he said 1996 and Isaac Newton said 2060. You remember 2028 fell right in the middle of this by minus 32 years, and he was minus 32 years. Newton was plus 32, which was the year Jesus made his entrance into Jerusalem. 2028 is take the 1948 regathering of Israel plus 80 years, which is in Psalm 90, 70 years, but with strength 10 more. So that was just a pattern we noticed, because we're free. Remember, we're in a learning environment. We're in the ecclesia, a living organism. But like a learning organization, the seminary, which is a learning organization, you are able and free and encouraged to study everything. And we noticed when we took the 6,000 to 20,000 range of young Earth, or chronological years, I should more correctly say, and we started with 6,250 year increments at 12-hour day, just using Bible data. Remember, we have this, we're encouraged, especially if you attend the seminary I did, you were given a panoply of tools to deploy in your study and do exhaustive study and research. And but again, back to AlexO'Connor, I don't know what he would say. I got no feedback. He may be exercising the same cognitive and affective biases we see when people avoid source material. People will avoid things in the Bible just entirely, which is certainly a bias, of course. But we noticed that when we added this up, we had the 12,500 years at 24 hours total here. And then if we took that number of years times 360 days, that equaled 4.5 million days. days. And then if we then multiplied it by the 1,000 years, we just changed the zeros. That gave us 4.5 billion years. Now, that's not chronological years. That's accrued decay if we translated it, converted it into years. Just like if you do dimensional analysis and you convert units of measure from one thing, let's say kilometers to meters, we're talking about days to years, but we're also talking about these years. We're now talking about not chronological years, but we're talking about geological, the amount of accrued decay, for example. So again, this is not a problem for anyone. I don't know how to make the young versus old earth a problem for someone. I wouldn't know why we would want to, but again, I'm not in a religion. I'm in an ecclesia. So we learned here if we took the 4.5 and multiplied it to come back now to days, we noticed that 1,000 days is 2.78, approximately 2.78 360-day years, and that equaled 12.5 billion. Now, why I point out this is not chronological is because between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, I'll just use here, for example, Bullinger, E.W. Bullinger, famous Bible scholar, whether you agree with his theology or not, I'm talking about the language work he does. He had said once in some writing, a book he had written, that you could place all the time, speaking of geologists, between 1:1 and 1:2. It's just, there's no such thing as chronological time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. And Dr. Penn was very astute in that observation to say referential time had not yet even been created. So for us, earthbound, time-bound, living in a time and space-bound environment, a living environment, however, but governed by time and space, referential time, relativity, then there's really no time there. So what are we measuring when we hear people speak of how much time between those two texts? So this is really good stuff. But this is what you would do if you're accustomed to solving all your problems the same way you've ever solved one. Your solution might not match any more than what it required you to deploy. And that's one thing. If you're really interested, you want to know as much as there can be known, which none of us will have a lifetime for it. So that's why I engage people like the retired professor, research assistant for Dr. John Penn, hear him and his accumulated years of influence and working out a hermeneutic, holistic perspective, because we can back away and notice right now that where would you find anyone to even have this conversation on just that one tiny board at no greater arithmetic level than third grade and with no greater language skill than what we can take to navigate a Bible, blueletterbible.org language tool. So that's good news. We can certainly discuss something much greater than the degree of difficulty for others to have achieved it. I didn't invent the computer. I didn't invent the blueletterbible.org website, and certainly would have loved to have had something like that decades ago. But here we are. This is a lot. But if you ever find someone or an organization, the seminary, I'd recommend that, or and then more, of course, above a seminary, of course, would be the ecclesia. Find a learning, living body of believers who come out, made their exit, so that Egyptianity is where the futility is, and it's where the accusations originate, and it's where you're judged whether or not you picked the right pyramid, and they make problems for you if you don't go along with them. Well, that's not in Christianity, and that's certainly not among the Christians, which are the members of the ecclesia. They're covenant together to carry out this kingdom work, to do things according to God's words, do it His way, and do it for His glory, do it by Christ Jesus, and do it in that ecclesia where we build each other up, live with the interests of each other. So have a blessed day and enjoy this lesson.